Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Linda Depker. I'm in St. Louis metro area and have a daughter at University of Chicago. I'll be working with the YCBK team on communications.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a graduate of the University of Georgia, and she is getting her master's degree at North Carolina State University. Good morning, friends. It's episode 268, and we have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to dive right in. As promised in 267, where we did something we've never done before, gave you 4 recommended resources. We just teased them out then, and I said I would go into more depth on our Monday episode. So the first is the website studentaid.gov. Now, that should be your go-to website for anything to do with federal student aid. It is the go-to source. It is the source from the Department of Education. But it's particularly important right now if you have any connection, interest, whether it's as a counselor, a student, a parent, on student loan forgiveness, because you go to studentaid.gov, and in 5 minutes you can submit an application for loan forgiveness. And just since the Thursday episode, there's been blowbacks from the courts. Courts are trying to stop this from being enacted. And who knows how it's all going to shake out. But there's always the possibility that a decision could be made. Anyone who's already had their loan processed, it will go forward. But for those who haven't, it won't. You just don't know. So it's urgent, in my opinion, if you've got eligibility for federal student loan forgiveness, that you get to studentaid.gov and complete the 5-minute form so you can get your 10 or 20K back. All right, that's the first thing I teased out. The second thing I teased out, and this is really important, it's really about an hour and 10-minute interview with 4 financial aid officers, all discussing the college scholarship search profile, aka CSS profile, aka profile, as most of us just call it the profile because it's too much of a mouthful to say the rest. For those of you who are new, the profile is a financial aid form that is required by a couple hundred schools. They are mostly wealthier schools and about 7 public schools, mostly private wealthier schools. And this is so they can determine how they'll give out their own institutional money, where the FAFSA is for federal money. The profile has 230 questions, so it's very detailed, and it can be quite complicated. And what I love about this interview that I'm recommending, it's a supplementary or complementary source to the one we shared a few weeks ago, is they're actual financial aid officers, and they're answering the most difficult questions, the most frequently asked questions about the profile. It's actually hosted by the Coalition for College, and they did a really good job, in my opinion, picking the questions, and they did a really good job picking the panelists. In fact, I'll just put it out there right now. The one from Wellesley, I'm going to be reaching out to her directly to do an interview with her. I was that impressed with her. She's the director there, 15 years experience. But they were all good. So who's on the panel? You have a financial aid officer from Reed College. You have one from Colby College. You have one from Boston University. And then you have one from Wellesley. And quite honestly, they were all quite great. But there's just a lot of answers people can get to this very complicated process. And I'm going to share one thing that I've learned from that's caused me to change my advice that I'll give families. So I used to say to people, if you're not going to qualify for financial aid, you may want to complete the FAFSA at least first year, maybe the profile. And I would say, because some schools have a policy that if you don't complete it the first year, you can never get money ever. And so it's wise to do that. What I did not realize is how many schools have a pause policy. Now, what does that mean? If you don't complete the profile and you have a financial need, there's a pause of, could be whatever time they specify, And that pause means that there's a length of time when you would not be eligible for financial aid. So 2 of the 4 schools on the panel had pauses. One was a 2-year pause and one was a 1-year pause. So what does that practically mean? You don't apply for financial aid because you don't think you're not going to qualify. Then you lose a job and then you say, oh my goodness, I don't want to pull our kid out of school. Can I do the financial aid forms? And they say, yes, but you're ineligible for money for 2 years. Now, if you're at a really expensive school, that's a pretty expensive proposition. And what these schools do is they have a policy that had you, in fact, completed a profile, even if you had not qualified, then they would not, in effect, put the pause plan in place. This is another example of why I tell you schools that say they're need blind are really truly not need blind, because that's not a need blind initiative, but it's a way of managing your budget. When you have something as big a line item as financial aid, you can't have it just blow up, $5 million on you the next year that you didn't have plans for. So this is a way of controlling their budget to prevent some of these exigencies. So what is the advice from the panel? It's very conservative advice, but I'm now giving it to my families, which is unless you have enough money for all 4 years of college saved away, and you could pay that even if you were to lose a job, then you should fill the form out. It's more like insurance. It protects you. At a minimum, you should find out what the pause policy is. Wellesley doesn't have a pause policy. But once again, they have a higher endowment per student than the other schools on the list. So I'm probably getting more into the weeds. The bottom line is, if you are a college counselor and you want to really buttress your knowledge of the profile, you really should watch this hour to minute video. If you're a parent and you are applying to very expensive schools that you would not be able to afford if you were to lose a job over the next 4 years, if you don't have the full cost of attendance saved up for all 4 years, then you should watch this as well. That's the most conservative thing to do. So I want to strongly recommend that resource, which was the second one. The third resource goes back to a book that I struggled not keeping in the top list when it comes to really understanding how decisions are made. And some people might be surprised I picked this book because it goes back a while. This is not a new book. In fact, a lot of the research for this was done in 2000, 2001, when Mitchell Stevens, a sociologist, spent 18 months inside a college admission office. I mean, he did everything. In fact, it got to the point where not only were they letting him read files, he was doing information sessions and even going on the road on some recruitment trips. So he really became immersed in the office. And the difference between this book and a lot of the others out there is he's a sociologist. So he approaches studying schools from a sociology standpoint. Now, throughout the college is just referred to as the college, and he went to great lengths to try to keep the confidentiality of the college, but I'll just really cut to the chase. Word got out that he was at Hamilton College. So the school he's talking about throughout the whole book is Hamilton College. I don't know how they feel about that. It was designed to be confidential. I don't know exactly how word got out, but everyone in our industry knows that Mitchell Stevens is talking about Hamilton College. And I'm just going to actually read a little portion of it to you. Now, keep in mind, I'm really into sociology. I love reading sociological theories, transformational theory, reproduction theory, all of that. So perhaps I had more of an acute interest in this than maybe some people will. But as a sociologist, what he does is he explains how these institutions work at a whole different level even than a reporter does. Because you get reporters for all the other, books I've recommended strongly, whether it's Who Gets In and Why by Salingo, that's a reporter. The Price You Pay for College. Lieber is a reporter. The fourth one I'm going to recommend after this is a reporter. So I'm just going to read a little bit of the book to you, and I think this will give you a sense whether or not this is your cup of tea or not as I read this to you. Hoping to learn about admission officers and their work up close, I spent 18 months as a participant observer in an office of a highly selective liberal arts college in the Northeast, 2000 and 2001. When I began, I was interested primarily in what I thought was a generic evaluation problem. How organizations make fine distinctions between people who are on paper quite comparable. At the beginning, it barely occurred to me that there might be a bigger story to tell from that work. At the beginning, I did not appreciate how that office might be a good perch for which to survey the broader landscape of formal schooling in America. I learned fairly quickly, however, that in order to understand how admission officers make their decisions, I needed to look carefully at the social machinery that delivered applications to admission offices in the first place. I needed to figure out why people at a school with one of the most competitive admission profiles in the country spent many weeks each year on the road, like traveling salesmen drumming up applications. I needed to figure out why a proudly academic institution cared so much about applicants who were better at football and hockey than they were at English or math. Ouch. I needed to figure out why a school with such a traditionally Anglo Eastern seaboard clientele so eagerly courted applicants who were U.S. minorities, applicants from all over the world. I needed to figure out why it seemed to matter so much that the school I studied was a physically beautiful place. In the process of figuring all this out and reading and talking and traveling and filing alongside the people who did it all for a living, I became convinced that this little office offered a keyhole glimpse into the larger workings of a distinctly American stratification system. This book is largely about how privileged families and the impressive organizational machinery they have developed to pass their comfortable social positions on to their children. Studying privileged people is important because they create the ladders others must climb up in the world. Nowhere is this more true in schools, which have been official ladders of mobility and opportunity in the U.S. society for hundreds of years. So, listen, I have Anika's voice flashing in my mind. Don't read too much, don't read too much. But hopefully that gives you a glimpse. And if you want a real sociological lens at what happens at these institutions and why they're so transformative, and why certain things matter more than others, as well as a look into the admission process. Mitchell Stevens creating a class not only is a great book, Angel Perez, the president of NACAC, says it's his number one book he tells families to read. And that's someone who's been over the admission office at Trinity and Pitzer and has a very good lens into higher ed. So I'd strongly recommend Mitchell Stevens' book, Creating a Class. Paperback came out in 2009-10, but boy, it's as relevant today as it was on the day it was written. And then the last book I mentioned was The Gatekeepers. Now, I've referred this one before, but this was the forerunner to Salingo's book, Who Gets In and Why. This just reads like such a captivating novel where Jock Steinberg, Ward Pulitzer Prize winning writer for the New York Times, spent 10 months inside Wesleyan's University. And he also tracks the life of 5 very different applicants through the admission process. And he's on the road traveling, he's writing, and he really takes you inside the admission office. And you really get a sense of how decisions are made. And really, it reads like a captivating novel. And so, just for follow up, those are the recommended resources that I talked about on Thursday, and I wanted to share with you today. Okay, friends, what is grinding my gears? This is painful. I'm going to try to do it through a few stories. So I'll start with a conversation that I had with a friend who is flipped the other side of the desk, gone from admissions to college counseling. And we were talking recently, and I said, "How's it going?" And one of the statements my friend said was, "I'm just really struggling with the things parents say right in front of their kids. Do they have any idea what they're doing to their self-esteem?" That's one story. Snippet, another story that happened to me maybe less than 5 years ago, 3 to 5 years ago. A student that I had worked with, very bright, very talented, attended a very competitive college. And to make a long story short, the student ended up having to go through some, pretty significant therapy. And one of the things that came out in the therapy is the student was depressed because they felt they'd let their father down because they never got into Harvard. That's story number 2. Story number 3, recently, I just had a student tell me, "Can you please talk to my father and tell him to stop talking to me so much about Harvard and Yale?" And this is what I want to say. A lot of times parents are very well intentioned. They just want their children to reach their full potential, and they don't want them to settle for anything less than their full potential. But it really, really grinds my gears because we have a healthcare crisis in this country, a mental health care crisis in this country with our teens and with our youth. And a lot of it can stem from students feeling like they did not make their parents proud. And a lot of it happens in the college process through parents unknowingly, unwittingly doing very subtle things to imply that, if you get in that school, that's okay, but I'd kind of like to see you get in this school over here. And the way a student interprets that is, I guess I'm not living up to my parents' expectations for me. I guess I'm a failure. And that can cause a whole series of other mental health maladies and ailments to beset that student that can impact them for the rest of their life. And, there's a number of built-in difficulties in this admission process. One of them is how much things have changed. Go back to 1990 when schools like Johns Hopkins, WashU were taking 50, 60% of their applicants. Fast forward now and, single digits. And so you're a parent and you grew up in that generation. There's nothing for you to think of throwing out names that at your time really weren't that hard to get in. But kids know different. They're living in this world. And that's why in a recent study, 68% of kids said they were struggling with their mental health. This is a real problem. Um, it's a big problem. And it's one that I just want to urge you as a parent, please do not make your child feel like you will be more proud of them if they get into their more selective schools over their less selective schools. It's just very, very, very important. Um, Kids confide in me when I meet with them. They say some of the most painful things that all stem from this. I'll share another story. I was working with a student a few years ago, and it's usually the dads, not always, but it is usually the dads. I'm sorry, but it just usually is. Very good student, great kid. She'll do really, really well in life. She just wasn't a student that would have been a good match for Harvard. Spent an insane amount of money preparing for the SAT, and the highest she could get on her math was a 600. She was really strong on the verbal side, high 700s, but 600 math. And then also, she wasn't in those higher level courses in math. Her math score tended to correlate with where she was at curricular wise as well. It was a good predictor in this case. So this just wasn't a good match for her. And I went through, and these are in family meetings, and dad just would not stop telling me, what about Harvard? What about Harvard? What about Harvard? I called him aside and I set up a private meeting. And then I told him the story that I shared with you earlier without obviously mentioning names or schools about the student that was in therapy because she felt she let her father down, that she never got into Harvard. And he said, okay, 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 I'll get it. I understand. Then we get into the next family meeting and he says, what about Yale? Now, obviously these are extreme examples and maybe not even the best ones for me to bring up. And I should probably share things that are just much, much more subtle, like encouraging to go on a tour. Um, I see a lot of things in the counseling room. I see kids intentionally not even aiming for selective schools that they probably could get into because they're afraid that they're going to fail and let their parents down. And so I just want to throw it out there. Please, 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 for the sake of our kids' sanity and mental health, just know that as a parent, when you throw out these schools that are incredibly difficult to get into, these schools that take less than half of their valedictorians, and you sort of imply, I think that would be really good for you. The way your kid can hear that is, I guess my parents won't be proud of me if I don't get into one of those names. And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And however that applies, I'll let you figure that out in your household. But I see the carnage that happens because of that. And I'm just trying to use the platform I have to to protect our kids from any more damage. Okay, that was a little heavy. Let's get to something a little bit less heavy. I'm very excited to say we are starting a brand new interview today. Um, and it's with a college president, which makes me really excited. And the college president is Dr. Martha Saunders. And, every now and then I get these people that reach out to me like they're, these presidents, they hire publicity firms and they do research and they identify podcasts that might be a good place. And so most of the time when those people call me, to be honest, it's not a match. But every once in a while, one catches my attention, and that's what happened here. It was a publicity firm that reached out, and I listened, and I said, "Oh, this sounds interesting." So we set up an initial conversation, and it went really well. And Dr. Martha Saunders is the president of the University of West Florida. She's been a president at multiple schools, and we really do a higher ed top-down view of what's going on in higher ed, and then we get, of course, into West Florida. It is a two-parter. In part one, Dr. Saunders tells about her progression from not just a professor, but an adjunct professor to college president. She shares several unique aspects of her background. She answers the question of what can colleges and universities do to increase the perception of their value with an ever increasingly cynical public. She tells us what she means when she uses the term high impact practices. She talks about how they at University of West Florida adjust their curriculum to the needs of the student body. She talks about how they use interdisciplinary programs to provide exposure to classes that students don't seem like they're that interested in, but they really need to be taking. And she also tells us what she means by commodity programs. Listen and enjoy. Friends, I'm here with Dr. Martha Saunders from the University of West Florida. Welcome to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, Martha.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, we had another president from Belhaven University on a while ago, Roger Parrott. I don't know if you know him.
I know Belhaven pretty well. I haven't met Roger yet, but it's a good school.
Well, we got such a great response that we said, hey, let's bring some more presidents on because, you guys have kind of this big macro view of higher ed, and there's a lot of changes and things going on. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your backstory so our listeners have a sense of different roles you've had in higher ed?
Well, I came into higher ed relatively late in the game. I had worked in industry and done other things, and I started as an adjunct.
Nice.
And then was offered a full-time position and discovered that I just loved higher ed. And so I've been at it for a long time.
Sure.
I came up the academic ranks. I was a faculty member. I was a dean, and then moved on to a grand professional adventure that took me to two other presidencies before this one. And but this is where I got my start here at UWF. I started as a faculty member, so the work I'm doing now is truly a labor of love. I love what we're doing here. I love the place. I love the university. Love our students, and I'm excited that there are people who really want to help their kids get ready for college, and are thinking about the things that they need to think about. Also, just a bit of trivia. My husband and I raised 7 children.
Whoa.
So we know, we know all of the anxieties and uncertainties and concerns that parents have and that students have too when they're making a decision. And students just can't afford to make a mistake. It's too much of an investment. So the more you can think about it and prepare, the more likely they will be successful.
Well, there's one thing I know about you now. You're a very hard worker because there's no way that you could raise 7 kids, which in of itself is a Herculean task. And then you add on that climbing the ranks from an adjunct to a president at your third institution. So a couple questions. Love to know the other 2 schools you were president at. And secondly, do you find that there's a chemistry or an element of trust that you have with faculty because you were sort of once one of them and have had all these various roles? Does that help you at all?
I think it absolutely helps if you know universities, and certainly with the faculty. When you come up the ranks, starting from adjunct up, then at least they're sure you understand, and trust matters.
Sure.
We have a lot of hard decisions to make, and people are more likely to go along with them if they feel like you've considered their points of view and that you sort of know how what all of the stakeholders have in common. So that is very, very helpful.
And the other
And
two
I was
schools?
president. Yeah, you asked me.
Sure.
I was president. I was chancellor at the University of Wisconsin Whitewater,
Nice.
and then I went to my alma mater as president of the University of Southern Mississippi. And but I'm back home in Florida, at West Florida.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Well, we're going to talk today about trends and challenges facing universities. I love this conversations with presidents, and it's even better that you've been at multiple schools because I think it just gives you even more of of that macro view that we love. I know one of your areas of expertise is public relations, and I know you've won several awards in this area. We all know higher ed is under attack. Surveys are showing teenagers, especially more conservative students and men, are really questioning the value of college these days. Dr. Saunders, what do you feel colleges and universities can do to address the concern of college isn't necessarily worth my money from a public relations standpoint?
Well, that's a very good question, and we talk a lot about that. And of course, I'll have to admit my bias. I think education is the answer to every question, and the more you know, the more you understand. The more you understand, the more you can make happen. And that happens in higher ed. But sometimes those arguments are sound kind of lofty and kind of stuffy. Uh,
Sure,
we spend, we can show a lot of data that shows that people with degrees are going to make more money. They're more likely to start a business. I mean, there are all kinds of data out there, but it doesn't. It you really need to get to people where they live, and I think our challenge today is to meet the students where they are. They have visions for their lives that we need to go to them and say, what is that, and how can we help you get there through education? And that is kind of a on the ground, working with recruiters, and listening to what they're telling us. So it's not the work of a day. I
sure.
think for the longest time, everyone just assumed if you have a college degree, the skies will open and rainbows will appear and everything will be perfect. And life is complicated and things are changing. And I think students are right to question it. I think they should, and then wait and see what kind of answers they collect. It's not easy. Not easy.
Yeah, I'm assuming you would be an advocate of obviously data to show research, report studies, but probably things like strengthening your experiential education options and having a really strong career center that can really help provide strong outcomes. Would those be some of the things you'd be an advocate of?
Very much so. And my university has led the state over the last 3 years in percentage of graduates who have jobs.
Oh, that's important.
Well, it is important, and we certainly beefed up our career center, and we do a lot of the important things. But we have emphasized what you just mentioned. I call them high impact practices.
I
There's
like that.
experiential learning,
Yeah,
and we even have set as one of our own metrics that we want every graduate to have two. That could be internship, it could be undergraduate research, it could be service learning, it could be study abroad.
hmm,
There are a lot of things they can do, but it sets them apart when that resume hits the hiring table. And also, it gives them a taste of what they're getting into. So we like them to do it early, because you might think you want to be, you know, um, mechanical engineer, but you might change your mind. and so, uh, and so we want them to be thinking about those things early. And so we have been emphasizing that for really the last decade, and I think that's paying off.
No, I absolutely love it. First of all, I'm going to borrow that high impact practices from you. I like it better than experiential learning, which I've been using. So, but I'll give you attestation. I'll quote you. I'll
Okay.
give you credit. And I love the fact that you're leading the state. Now, you've been doing this for a decade. Have you seen a direct correlation between you implementing the high impact practices and trying to get students to do two of them and jobs.
Well, it makes a difference because we're also we're moving students and encouraging them to where we know the jobs are.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but it has made a positive difference, and the students are telling us that, and the employers are telling us, said, we hired Susie Smith because she clearly had experience in this, or had these experiences that set them apart.
So what's an area where you see the jobs are that you've sort of beefed up, either your program, your offerings, or your placement? Because what I'm hearing you say, we're watching the job world and we're trying to make sure we're being relevant to that. Can you comment on sort of an area where you've made some application as a result of what you're seeing research wise?
Our system, the Florida State University system, has they identify every few years programs of strategic emphasis,
Okay.
and so they gather lots of data and say this appears to be, that these are the growing enterprises. These are the ones that where there is a gap, and where we see a future need. And then we take that and bring it home,
Mm-hmm.
and take a look, even just in our own region. For example, and this is just an example, but it's possible that the rest of the state doesn't need school principals, but our region might.
Sure.
And so we'll layer onto that what we know is needed. But one of the advantages that we have here, I think we do well at UWF, we're very agile. Universities aren't known for moving too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
But we take this information and we accept that we may not need that program forever. And as soon as it starts to wane, we'll start making provisions to sunset it or adapt it to the next thing. So, and we pay close attention to the job market, but we also realize as a university, there's a lot more learning that goes on at college than just job training.
Exactly.
There are fundamental skills that employers tell us time and time and time again. They need to be able to speak. They need to be able to give a presentation. They need to be able to write and condense what they know into 6 paragraphs that a busy CEO can read.
Mm-hmm.
and and work with teams. And so those are skills that across the board anybody needs if they're going to make it in the world. And so we haven't given up on those programs that give us that, the humanities, the things that we've always understood make an educated person educated.
And interesting. Yeah. So now are you experiencing blowback because there's a lot of pressure on schools to drop the humanities and drop social sciences, even languages? There's a perception that they don't have value and they're under attack. It's something we've talked about multiple times, even had a specialist come on our podcast to address.
Well, we have when students vote with their feet, and if they stop
Sure.
majoring in an area,
Right.
what we've done, because we do value it, we encourage things like joint majors. Our music program has a now we've approved they can major in 2 things, so they can go into the arts, but also a business course. So we have emphasized partnering up there, and as many I call them interdisciplinary uh, programs. And just for example, and we strongly encourage lots of interdisciplinary. Our theater program this year had a play, and in partnership with the theater program and our engineering program, they built a mechanical puppet, you know, that actually worked. and and so these were theater students that you often think of as sort of artsy types,
Sure.
building highly technical electronics, for and so those are kind of things that we try to make sure. We want them to be relevant, and the deans understand that, and they're finding niches
Mm-hmm.
within these traditional humanities that, and the parents feel better about it. Parents do expect the child to grow up and start paying their own bills and
Sure, sure.
move on. And so we want to make sure that the student is thriving in an area that they're good at, but also have that potential for employment.
So you've raised all kinds of questions in my mind based on your answers. One, I do want to go back to what I asked before. Is there a area that, based on your research of job trends, you've said, you know what, we either need to add this or strengthen this? And then I'm going to ask you I'll ask a two-parter. You did indicate that you need to also be looking and seeing if the job market's drying up, you may need to sunset some programs. So I'm assuming you probably have experience with that. And so I'd love to kind of hear an example of each of those.
Well, in the ones that have worked, and of course,
Mm-hmm.
we look at the STEM programs are growing everywhere, but also every community needs what I call the commodity programs. You need teachers, you need accountants, you need business people, and so we make sure that we're providing, that might be not the most flattering word, but it's these
Yeah,
things that every community needs,
sure.
and there will always be ready jobs. And then as far as and then we also encourage for programs that are growing. I have sunsetted programs before, and that's not it's not flipping a switch.
Mm-hmm.
It is usually as you start seeing it decline, as it well, you can't flip a switch.
Sure, sure.
It has to be a kind of a slow glide, but you go ahead and start marking it as this is a program that is either going to be greatly reduced, and you do that by you redirect the resources. A faculty member retires, and instead of replacing that faculty member in a declining program, you move it to one where the where there's a greater demand. But at some point, you still have to. I mean, you can't. You will. You'll have to make a decision. Can it stay at all? And so far, especially our humanities, they support so much. I mean, they are supportive of so many of the other programs that there will always be that function. So for us, we've been able to keep the balance, and that's a big challenge to my provost, my academic
Sure,
affairs vice president, because
sure.
he's the guy that has to, feed the you know, feed the meter. I mean, as far as if people are where the high demand is, while maintaining. But what we can't do is just rest. It is a constant, and we have really worked recently in the last, I'd say, 10 years on data. The more we know,
Sure.
the more we can spot anomalies and fix and spot problems or issues before they come up. So we spend a lot of time just watching what's moving, what's not moving, where's the demand. And the good news is, there things don't happen overnight. You can watch trends build and you can watch things decline. And so if you're paying attention, you're not going to be faced with some of those unpleasant moments where you're
Sure.
having to just say, golly, we can't afford you anymore.
Friends, this concludes the first part of our three-part interview. I hope you'll join us next week for part 2 of 3. Friends, on Thursday's episode, Dave is back, and he's back to talk about a really exciting article called Southern Exposure. This looks at the great migration of students to Southern schools. It's a town and country article by Nicole Laporte. I think you're really going to enjoy the robust conversation Dave and I had. He finally got a new computer, so the sound quality is a little better. So hope you'll tune in for that on Thursday. And then Julia and I pick up the final part of what Lisa and I did on part 1 and 2, talking about why do schools routinely take students with lower test scores and lower GPAs over students with higher test scores and higher GPAs. Great conversation with Julia about the importance of context. And then we'll continue with part 2 of my interview with Justin Doty and Paul McGinley, looking at how Division III schools do athletic recruiting. And we really get into the nuts and bolts of recruiting in this one. If you really want to know a lot of the details, I'm not even going to do a preview. It'd be really long, but it's a very detailed discussion that's very rich. I think you'll find it very rewarding. And guess what? A college spotlight is up. Kevin Newton is back. We're going to talk about the ancient Scottish colleges, 5 colleges in that group. It could be St. Andrews, it could be Edinburgh, it could be Aberdeen, it could be Glasgow or Dundee. And we're just going to talk about all of them as a unit. That's going to be over the next three weeks. Hope you join us on Thursday. See you next week, everybody. And remember, please consider financial fit when you're looking at colleges. Don't only look at academic fit. Don't only look at social fit. Don't only look at emotional fit. Look at financial fit. Is it within my budget? See you next week. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you'll get every single episode as soon as it is released. If you're interested, there are a few ways you can really support our podcast. You can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can help us pay our staff and our expenses by donating on our website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. I'm the producer of the podcast, but we have a fantastic team of 14. Shout out to our co-host, Dr. Lisa Ruff, Dr. David Williams, Susan Tree, Vince Garcia, and Julia Esquivel, and to our substitute co-host, Sylvia Borgo. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs are from Kimberly Blass. Lily Parikh manages our Instagram. Our image editor is Talha Khan. Joyce Ducker does our website episode updates. And our webmaster is Stalianos Dimitriou. If you want to have a coaching session with Lisa or me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you have a question you want us to answer, or if you have a recommended resource or article you think we should discuss, just send it to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. By the way, check out our website, where you'll find lots of content that is not on any podcast app. Our website is yourcollegeboundkid.com. If you want to learn about other hot admissions topics, follow us on Twitter at YCBK Podcast. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting again with you every single Thursday.